There are kings, there are leaders, there are heroes. Then there is a Shivaji Bhosle. From an inherited band of 2,000 soldiers to an army of 100,000 men. From a handful of fortifications to 360 forts. From son of a general to king of an empire. Here was somebody for whom nature would stand up and say, this was a man. Alright, that's what Shakespeare spoke of Julius Caesar. But then he hadn't heard of Shivaji Bhosle. And this was where it all began, the Shivneri Fort. Now it was the 17th century and the state of Bijapur was constantly at war. So the general of the army, concerned for the safety of his family, moved his expecting wife to the close confines of the walls of the Shivneri Fort, where she gave birth to a boy. A boy who would grow up to become one of the greatest rulers of India, Shivaji. So we thought, let's do some time travel. Let's drive some roads that a soldier king once rode. Let's raid some forts where a legend once lived. Now to do that, we are using these two cars, Volkswagen Polo GTs, a TSI petrol and a TDI diesel. Now if you've been watching Volkswagen's recent marketing and advertising campaigns surrounding these cars, it kind of focuses on the respect that Volkswagen thinks that these cars command on Indian roads. Well, while we pay our respects to one of India's greatest heroes, let's find out if these cars actually deserve the respect that they demand. Shivaji rode through the Ghats and conquered countless forts through his art of guerrilla warfare. Our next destination was one such fort, the capture of which reeks of valor and tenacity that the Marathas were known for. The 136-kilometer drive bypassing the city of Pune was for most part through some brilliant forested roads and twisties. Perfect time then to put the Polo GTs through the grind. The regular Volkswagen Polos get 1.2-litre petrol and 1.5-litre diesel engines. The Polo GTs also get 1.2-litre petrol and 1.5-litre diesel engine, but of course there is a difference. Let's start with the diesel. The 1.5 is in a different state of tune in the GT TDI, making 15 PS more power and 20 Nm more torque than the regular Polo diesel. Now when I drove the new generation of the regular Polo with the 1.5 TDI engine, I'd said that it probably meant that you didn't need to consider the GT TDI because the performance of the 1.5 litre in the regular Polo was so impressive on its own. But having driven the GT TDI with the 1.5 litre engine, it's easy to see that Volkswagen have been able to improve the drivability and the tractability thanks to the extra 20 Nm of torque, which essentially means that the in-gear performance of the diesel motor has been improved for the GT TDI. Unlike the TDI, the 1.2 TSI petrol is a completely different unit. Don't let the puny 1197 cubic centimeters of engine size fool you, because it packs in a little mechanical steroid called a turbocharger. The forced induction means that the TSI can boast of doing over 17 kilometers on a single liter of petrol in the Polo GT. But here's the tasty bit. Volkswagen have been able to extract about 105 PS of power from this smallish engine, which is an absolute hoot to drive. Now, if you are a driving enthusiast, it just simply doesn't get better than this. The Sinhgarh fort that you see behind me is known for the famous Battle of Sinhgarh that took place in 1670. Now this was when the bravest general of Shivaji's army, Tanaji Malusare, recaptured the fort in spectacular fashion. Now this feat was incredible because it was considered almost impossible to climb the cliff face of the fort, which Tanaji managed. How? With the help of Yashwanti. Yashwanti was a monitor lizard, that's right. And such was the strength of this monitor lizard, also called as a Ghorpad in Maharashtra, that they tied ropes around it, it would then climb the cliff face and then carry the weight of a soldier. Now Tanaji didn't live long enough to see the capture of the fort, and then Shivaji famously said, "Gad ala, pan siha gela." We got the fort, but we lost the lion. It was time to move forth to our next fort, which was probably one of the most important one in the story of the Marathas and Shivaji. It was the place where Shivaji was coronated to become Chhatrapati Shivaji, the King of Kings. Located about 150 kilometers from the Sinhagad Fort, nestled within the Raigad Forest Natural Reserve is the Raigad Fort. The theme of the drive continued to be forests and hills, and both Alan and I were starting to push the limits of the GTs, lawfully of course. Now I spent most of yesterday driving the GT TDI, and the clutch pedal is a little bit on the heavier side. Now, unlike Europe, the average gear shifts per drive in India is much higher, which means my foot is really sore from that. But right now I'm driving the GT TSI, which of course has an automatic gearbox, but no ordinary automatic gearbox. This has Volkswagen's DSG dual clutch gearbox. Now, DSGs are inexpensive technologies and are usually found in high-end performance cars, but the GT TSI is the only hatchback in India to have this technology. So once again, no compromise on the performance front, which, well, earns my respect. Now I remember when Volkswagen first launched the Polo in India way back in 2010, I remember thinking to myself that the Europeans just don't get India. Now the suspension setup on that car was almost completely unchanged from the Eurospec car, which meant that it was too stiff for the Indian roads. But then when they launched the new generation last year, well, they turned that around, and how? The new Polo started creating benchmarks in terms of ride and handling, and well, we've been on some of the worst roads that India has in rural Maharashtra. Well, both the GTs have completely championed them. So Volkswagen, kudos. The Polo GTs are all about the performance, but there's no compromise on safety. Both the GTs get dual front airbags along with ABS as standard, while the GT TSI also gets ESP and hill control additionally. So the Polo GTs have all the makings of a hot hatch that you can use every day, but that's not all. The Polos also have a bit of motorsport pedigree, and given my personal inclinations, that deserves an emphatic nod of approval. Now, not only did Sebastian Ogier defend his driver's title in the World Rally Championship last year, but even Volkswagen defended their Constructors' Championship. And it's not just the world stage, Volkswagen was also responsible for introducing India to the concept of single-make track racing championships with the Polo R Cup. And this was at a time where the Indian motorsport scene wasn't at its best, so I think that certainly deserves a pat on the back as well. Upon arriving at the Raigad Fort, we realized that it is one of the best kept ones from the Maratha dynasty, and I reckon that's down to its importance. Shivaji had seized the fort in 1656, then the fortress of Raidri from the royal house of Chandra Rao Mauryas. Shivaji renovated and expanded the fortress of Raidri and renamed it Raigad, the King's Fort. The significance of the Maratha Empire is very important for you to understand. It was the Marathas who were responsible for the downfall of the mighty Mughals. It was also the downfall of the Marathas, the eventual downfall which led to the British rule of India. And now I find myself in the very courtyard of Chhatrapati Shivaji. Now, this is the place where everything came together and everything culminated in the end. Now, he made this his home. He made the Raigad Fort the capital of the entire Maratha kingdom. This is also the place where the final few chapters of his life were written. And it's only apt that our journey must end here.